In the midst of an extravagant engagement banquet, I stood there in a stunning red gown. The room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the kind of joy that seemed to echo forever. The love I thought I had was supposed to be immortalized in that moment, as I gazed lovingly at the man beside me, the one I had trusted with my heart. But fate had a cruel twist waiting, one I couldn't have anticipated. The sweet love video playing on the big screen suddenly shifted. What was once an affectionate montage of our relationship turned into something unrecognizable. The face of the man I called my fiancé now looked at me with nothing but cold indifference. My heart raced as the video continued to play, the truth unmasking itself before my eyes. I watched as the footage showed my boyfriend, the man I believed was the love of my life, intimately kissing someone else, my own sister. The laughter, the celebration, all felt like a distant echo as the weight of betrayal crushed me. My mind went blank, and the room seemed to spin. Everything I had known, everything I had believed, was now shattered into 1,000 pieces. The realization hit me like a wave, drowning me in a sea of confusion and heartbreak. My parents, the people who had raised me, were not even my real parents. The life I thought I had was a lie. Everything about my existence, my family, and the man I was supposed to marry, all of it, was fake. What was real anymore? Fury surged through me, a storm of emotions so intense that I could hardly think straight. I tore off the engagement ring, tossing it aside with reckless abandon. The anger, the betrayal, it was too much to bear. I turned toward him, my eyes burning with rage. "You're not worth it," I spat at him. "I'm not marrying you." "Damn it, I won't." As the words left my lips, I punched him, hard. The impact felt satisfying, but the hurt inside me lingered, unhealed and raw. In that moment, I fled the banquet, my heels clicking against the cold marble floor, my heart pounding. I didn't care about anything anymore. I was lost, consumed by grief and heartbreak. But the night didn't end there. In the darkness of my despair, I had a dream, one that would haunt me for the rest of my life. In the dream, I saw it all unfold. The betrayal, the lies, the deception. My boyfriend, no, he wasn't just cheating with my sister. He had been in league with others to ruin my life, to manipulate me for their own gain. And as I lay there, crushed beneath the weight of it all, I learned something that shook me to my core. The family that raised me, the parents I thought loved me, were not my biological parents either. They had stolen me from my true family. I woke up from that nightmare, my heart racing, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. Had I been living in a lie all this time? Was I meant to be someone else entirely? I couldn't sit back and do nothing. I had to change things. This time, I was determined to get to the bottom of it all, to uncover the truth and take control of my own destiny. I had one chance to rewrite everything, to save not just myself, but the people around me. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about finding a purpose. It was about reclaiming the life I was meant to live. As I walked the streets, still trying to piece together my shattered heart, I stumbled into something I hadn't expected. A chance encounter that would change everything. Lost in my thoughts, I accidentally bumped into a middle-aged couple. Their presence seemed so out of place in the night's quiet, and as I apologized, my eyes caught theirs. The man seemed struck by something, his lips trembling as if he wanted to say something, but no words came out. The woman beside him was equally unsettled, her red eyes betraying a history of pain I couldn't yet understand. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly from the emotional chaos I had just experienced. They both nodded, but the silence between us was thick, heavy with something unspoken. And then, the man spoke, his voice low but firm. "Are you Grace?" I froze, a chill running down my spine. My name. He knew my name. Before I could answer, his expression changed. His gaze softened with recognition. "We are your parents, Grace. Your real parents." The night after the banquet was the best night of my life. I couldn't stop replaying every moment in my head, the look in his eyes as he pulled away, the way his hand gently but firmly slipped out of mine. How could I have been so blind? I had thought we were perfect together. We had shared everything, our dreams, our secrets, even our darkest fears. Or so I believed. The sounds of the evening, laughter, soft music, the clinking of glasses, still echoed in my mind, but they no longer held any warmth. The warmth had been drained from everything I had once found beautiful. Now, everything felt suffocating. I walked slowly to the window of my apartment and gazed out at the city lights. Everything in my life had been a lie. I thought about the sweet words he had whispered to me, the promises he had made. And yet, in the blink of an eye, everything had shattered. How could he have fallen out of love with me so easily? How could someone who claimed to care so deeply turn into a stranger overnight? The worst part, I had been blind to it all. Blind to his growing distance. Blind to the signs that had been there all along. The video that had been played during the banquet haunted me, the video that had shown us in our happiest moments, looking like the perfect couple. How could that same video, once filled with laughter and love, now feel like a mockery? The room had been filled with well-wishers who thought they were witnessing a fairy tale, but little did they know that behind the scenes, the prince had already turned into a villain. I had been walking on air, thinking that I was the luckiest woman in the world. But now, I felt like I was plummeting into an abyss. Every moment we had shared together, every tender kiss and every stolen glance, felt like a cruel joke. I reached for my phone. I had tried calling him earlier, but he hadn't answered. And that silence, that deafening silence, was worse than anything he could have said. I checked my messages. There were none from him, just a string of conversations with friends, family, the usual. The thought of even looking at the conversation history with him was too much. I threw the phone aside and buried my face in my hands, tears welling up in my eyes. How could I have been so stupid? I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the pain. In the quiet of the night, memories came flooding back. Memories of the first time we had met, when everything had seemed so simple, so full of promise. He had looked at me then, with such intensity, that I had thought he was the one I would spend the rest of my life with. He had made me believe that love was easy, that it was meant to be. But love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't supposed to feel like a lie. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away, but they only grew stronger. Why hadn't I seen it? Why hadn't I recognized the signs that he was slipping away? Was I so caught up in the fantasy of our relationship that I ignored everything that was right in front of me? Suddenly, my phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. I looked down, half hoping it was him. But it wasn't. It was my best friend, Lily, asking if I was okay. I hadn't spoken to her since the banquet, too consumed with my own heartbreak to reach out. I quickly typed out a message, telling her I was fine, though I knew it was a lie. But that lie felt easier than the truth. The truth was that I wasn't fine. I was a broken shell of who I had been just a few hours ago. I needed to get out of the apartment. I needed to do something, anything, to stop the pain from consuming me. I grabbed my jacket, threw on some shoes, and stumbled out into the cold night air. The city was quiet, the streets almost deserted. The bright lights of the city seemed distant, almost mocking, as though they were reminding me of the life I no longer had. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept walking, my footsteps echoing in the empty streets. I passed by the bar I used to frequent. The one where I had spent so many nights with friends, laughing and talking about everything and nothing at all. The same bar where he had first kissed me, and we had made promises to each other under the dim lights. But tonight, there would be no promises. There would be no sweet words or warm embraces. Only a cold, aching emptiness. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The familiar smell of alcohol and smoke hit me instantly, but it didn't feel comforting anymore. It felt foreign. The bar was almost empty, just a few people sitting at the counter, lost in their own worlds. I ordered a drink, not caring what it was, just wanting to numb the pain. The first sip burned my throat, but it was the kind of burn I welcomed. I needed to feel something, anything, but the emptiness that had taken over my heart. The alcohol did nothing to ease the ache, but it helped me forget, if only for a moment. Time passed. How much, I couldn't say. I lost myself in the haze, drowning my sorrow in drink after drink, each one heavier than the last. I should have gone home. I should have called someone, asked for help. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just wanted to forget. As I stumbled out of the bar, the cool night air hit my face, a harsh reminder of the world I still had to face. I was alone. Utterly and completely alone. The streets seemed even emptier now, and the noise of the city faded into a distant hum. My thoughts were consumed with him. What had gone wrong? Why hadn't he fought for us? Was I that easy to discard? I didn't know how long I had been walking, but eventually, I found myself standing in front of an unfamiliar apartment building. I didn't know why I had come here. It wasn't like I had any connection to this place. But something about the stillness of the night made me feel like I could find some kind of answer here, some kind of solace. I stood there for a moment, staring at the entrance, when suddenly, I bumped into someone. Ouch! I gasped, losing my balance. My hand reached out to steady myself, but I ended up grabbing the arm of a middle-aged man who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. I'm so sorry, I muttered, my words slurring slightly from the alcohol. I wasn't paying attention. The man looked at me, his eyes wide with concern. His lips trembled slightly, and I could see his struggle to speak. He was with a woman. His wife, I assumed, who was equally startled. Her red eyes and tense expression told me that something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The man finally found his voice. Are you okay? His voice was thick with worry, but there was something about his gaze that seemed familiar, as though I had seen him before, but I couldn't place where. I nodded quickly. I'm fine. Just a little out of it. His wife, standing quietly beside him, glanced at me, then back at her husband. There was an unspoken communication between them, and I couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Why did they seem so nervous? Why did they seem to be holding something back? Then, the man spoke again, his voice soft and unsure. You're Grace, aren't you? His words hit me like a thunderclap, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Grace. That name. Why did it feel so familiar? Before I could respond, the woman beside him placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes filled with tears. Grace, we're your parents. The next few days were a blur, consumed by confusion, anger, and a crushing sense of betrayal. I tried to go on with my life as though everything was normal. I went to work, met with friends, and engaged in the daily motions that had once felt so comforting. But none of it was real anymore. Everywhere I went, I kept seeing his face, the man I had thought I loved, the man I had trusted completely. He was now nothing more than a ghost in my life, a figure that haunted my every step. The morning after the banquet, I was in a daze. It wasn't just that my fiancé had betrayed me. It was the realization that nothing about the life I had built was real. My parents, the people who had raised me, were not my biological parents. The love they had shown me, it was all a lie, a carefully crafted act designed to keep me under their control. The man I thought I was going to marry had been orchestrating the entire facade. The betrayal had run so much deeper than I had ever imagined. I couldn't even trust the person who had stood by my side for over 2 decades. The engagement ring that once symbolized our future together now felt like an anchor, dragging me deeper into the abyss of lies and deception. I walked out onto the balcony of my apartment, staring at the city below. The streetlights shimmered in the distance, casting long shadows over the quiet buildings. I felt numb. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have been so blind to everything? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. My emotions surged like a wave crashing against jagged rocks. I had been used, manipulated, lied to by the very people I had trusted most. My thoughts spiraled, and before I can it, I was pacing across the small apartment, feeling trapped in a cage of my own making. In my anger, I thought of ways to get back at them. Revenge. What could I do to make them feel even a fraction of the pain I was experiencing? But then I stopped myself. That was not who I was, and I knew that giving in to bitterness would only destroy me further. I needed to take control of my own life, to find a way to heal, to move on from the wreckage they had caused. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, my mind racing through 1,000 different scenarios. The pain of the betrayal weighed heavy on my heart. But somewhere, buried beneath the crushing emotions, was a tiny flicker of hope. I could rebuild my life. I could find a way to make it better. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity. I knew what I had to do. First, I had to leave the past behind me. I had to sever all ties with the people who had lied to me, who had pretended to be my family. I couldn't keep living in their shadow, not anymore. I packed up my things and moved into a new apartment, a small, cozy place that felt like a fresh start. It wasn't much, but it was mine. No one could take it from me. As I settled in, I found myself thinking about the dream I had had, the one where I saw my boyfriend cheating with my own sister. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it just my mind trying to process the betrayal? Or was there something deeper at play? The dream had felt so real, as if I had lived it before, as if I had already known the pain of losing everything. I decided to follow the same instinct that had led me to save a life in my previous life, not because I expected anything in return, but because it felt like the right thing to do. The memories from my dream haunted me, and I couldn't help but feel that I had been given another chance to fix things, to save people from the same heartbreak that had consumed me. But before I could even begin to figure out what that meant, I had to get past the grief that was holding me hostage. The anger, the sorrow, the betrayal, they were all like chains, keeping me from moving forward. The days passed, and I began to find some semblance of peace in my new life. I made new routines, started new hobbies, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest glimmer of happiness. But something was still missing. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I hadn't yet figured out. One night, while walking home from a cafe, lost in thought, I collided with someone. My body jerked forward, and I stumbled back. Ouch, I muttered, rubbing my head. I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking where I was going. The middle-aged man I had bumped into stood silently for a moment. He was tall, well-dressed in a dark suit, his face serious but kind. His lips trembled slightly, but he didn't speak. I glanced up at him, confused, when I noticed the woman standing beside him. She was petite, with dark hair and an anxious expression. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying for hours. I'm sorry, I stammered, my words coming out in a rush. Are you okay? The woman nodded, her eyes still filled with sorrow. We're fine, she said softly, her voice trembling. But there was something in her gaze, something that made me pause. It was as if she recognized me, or maybe I recognized her. But the connection didn't make sense. I had never seen her before in my life. Are you sure? I asked, my voice softening. You don't look okay. The man cleared his throat, looking down at the ground. Before finally speaking. We were just on our way home, he said, his voice low and hesitant. We've been looking for someone. For a long time. I felt a strange sensation rise in my chest. The words sounded too familiar, too close to something I had heard before. Something in my past life. What do you mean? Who are you looking for? I asked, my curiosity piqued. The woman's eyes flickered to the man before turning back to me. Her expression was conflicted, torn between hope and uncertainty. Someone we lost a long time ago, she whispered. The man stepped forward, his gaze fixed on me. Are you Grace? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. The name echoed in my mind, like a puzzle piece falling into place. But how did he know my name? Yes, I answered, though it came out in a breathless gasp. How do you know me? The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she stepped forward, placing a trembling hand on my shoulder. We are your parents. T.S., she said softly, her voice shaking with emotion. We are your real parents, Grace. The world seemed to spin as I struggled to comprehend what she had just said. My biological parents? But how could that be? I looked at the man, his face a mixture of sorrow and hope. His eyes were filled with a kind of recognition, an aching, desperate recognition. But this was impossible. How is that possible? I asked, my voice barely audible. I've been with the people who raised me for as long as I can remember. They're my parents. You can't be. The man raised his hand, stopping me before I could finish. We didn't want to tell you the truth. We thought it would be too painful. But we've been searching for you for years. We never stopped looking. His words crashed into me like a tidal wave. I had always felt there was something missing, something I couldn't quite place. But this was a truth I hadn't been ready for. My biological parents. The people who had given me life. They were here, standing in front of me, waiting for me to accept them. But the anger I had felt in the past, anger at being lied to, flared up again. How could they have kept this from me? How could they have let me live all these years without knowing the truth? Tears began to well in my eyes, blurring my vision. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did you leave me? Why did you let me grow up in the dark? The woman's eyes filled with sorrow, and she pulled me into an embrace. We never wanted to leave you, she whispered. But it wasn't safe. We had to protect you. We thought it was for the best. My mind was reeling, my emotions in turmoil. Everything I had known, everything I had built my life around, had just been shattered. And yet, in the midst of the chaos, I felt a strange sense of relief. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new. But one thing was clear, my life was no longer my own. It belonged to something much bigger, much more complicated than I could have ever imagined. My life had always been defined by family. My parents, though not my biological parents, had raised me with love, and I had never once questioned the bond between us. They were the ones who had always supported me, given me warmth and guidance, and provided the foundation of my life. But after the banquet, everything changed. I began to notice small things. My mother's gaze lingered just a little too long whenever I asked about my real parents. My father, though loving, seemed distracted at times, as though something was weighing on him, something he wasn't telling me. The more I tried to ignore the feeling in my gut, the stronger it became. One night, unable to sleep, I overheard a conversation between my parents. Their voices were hushed, but I could hear the tension in their words. I had to strain my ears, leaning in closer to the door, trying not to be discovered. He's back. Do you think she knows? My mother's voice was laced with fear. No, not yet. But it's only a matter of time. We've kept it hidden for so long, but she deserves the truth. She's not the person we've made her believe she is. The words struck me like a slap across the face. What were they talking about? What truth had they kept from me? In that moment, I realized my life, everything I had ever known, was built on lies. The next day, I confronted them. My heart raced as I walked into the living room where they were sitting, looking like they were waiting for something, or someone. What truth? I demanded, my voice shaky but firm. What have you been hiding from me? My mother's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't speak. Instead, my father stood up, his face pale, as though he had seen a ghost. He motioned for me to sit down. Grace, he began, his voice low and regretful, there's something you need to know. Something we've been holding back from you for your entire life. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling in my lap. What is it? Tell me. You're not our biological daughter, he said, each word hanging in the air like a heavy weight. We adopted you when you were a baby. Your real father, his name is Edward Grace. The room spun around me as those words sank in. Edward Grace? The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. The silence between us was deafening. I wanted to scream, to ask 1,000 questions, but all I could do was stare at them, trying to process the staggering revelation. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? I finally managed to say, my voice a mere whisper. We thought it was better that you didn't know, my father continued. But now, things are changing. Your real family, Edward Grace's family, has found out about you. They've been searching for you for years. A flood of emotions rushed through me, anger, confusion, disbelief. How could they have kept something like this from me? How could they not tell me the truth about my own identity? Why now? I asked, my voice cracking. Why are you telling me all of this now? They've found you, my mother said, her voice barely audible. Your biological father wants to meet you. And there's more. There's a legacy tied to your name, something much larger than any of us ever imagined. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I couldn't breathe, the weight of their words suffocating me. My whole life, the love I thought was real, the family I had trusted, was it all just a lie? I needed answers. I needed to know who I truly was, and why my biological family had abandoned me in the first place. Where is he? I demanded, my heart pounding. Where is Edward Grace? I want to meet him. I need to know the truth. My father exchanged a glance with my mother before speaking. He's at the Marcus family estate. They've been in touch with us, but we haven't made the connection yet. We wanted to protect you from all of this, Grace. You've been through enough already. I didn't care. All I could think about was finding the answers to the questions that had plagued me for so long. Who was I? Why had my real parents abandoned me? And most importantly, why was my life tied to the Grace family? The weeks after the banquet dragged on, each day like a dull ache that I couldn't escape. Despite the anger that coursed through my veins, I also felt a strange sense of emptiness, a hole in my heart that seemed to deepen with every passing moment. I was consumed by confusion, haunted by unanswered questions. One evening, as I sat at home, staring at the glowing screen of my phone, I realized that there had been no attempts to contact me. No apology, no explanation, nothing. It was as though my world had ceased to matter. My thoughts kept returning to that night, to the look in his eyes when he told me he couldn't marry me anymore. It was all so sudden. Too sudden. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that something had been amiss before that banquet. The cracks had always been there, hidden beneath layers of affection and promises. I had just been too blind to see them. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my work, but it was difficult. The hollow feeling gnawed at me, and even my colleagues noticed. I was usually an upbeat, motivated person, but now I was a shell of who I used to be. People whispered behind my back, but I didn't care. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. But then something unexpected happened. My mother, who had been unusually quiet lately, came to me one evening, her face drawn with worry. "Grace, there's something we need to talk about," she said softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. Her hands, always so steady, were now clenched tightly together. The look on her face sent a chill down my spine. "What is it, Mom?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Something about her expression made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to fall into a void of secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to face. She sighed, her shoulders slumping as though a weight she had been carrying for years was finally too much to bear. She sat down beside me on the couch, her eyes avoiding mine. "Grace, there's something we've never told you," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "Something that has been hidden from you all these years." My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea what she was about to say, but I felt a sense of dread creeping over me. "What is it, Mom?" I asked again, my voice now shaky with anticipation. I needed to know, needed to hear the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She hesitated for a long moment, as if she were weighing the consequences of her words. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. You're not really our daughter." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, everything around me went silent. My heart raced, My mind scrambled to process what she had just said. I wanted to speak, to ask questions, but nothing came out. I was frozen in place. What do you mean? I finally managed to croak, my voice sounding distant and hollow. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me. We're not your biological parents, Grace. You were adopted when you were very young. I stared at her, unable to comprehend her words. But why didn't you ever tell me? Why now? We didn't want you to feel different, Grace. We wanted you to have a normal life. You were so young when we adopted you, and we loved you like our own. We still do. But there's more. Your biological father, he's someone very important. Someone with a lot of power. Who is he? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My thoughts were spinning, and I could feel the ground beneath me shifting. Her face tightened, and she looked away, as if ashamed. His name is Edward Grace. I felt the world tilt around me. Edward Grace? The name was familiar. I had heard it whispered in the halls of high society, always associated with wealth, power, and influence. But I never would have guessed that he was my father. Edward Grace? I repeated, my voice trembling with disbelief. The Edward Grace? She nodded solemnly. Yes. Your real father is the head of the Grace family. And your biological mother, she paused, tears welling in her eyes. She was killed in an accident when you were just a baby. Edward, he couldn't keep you. So, he asked us to raise you as our own. I sat there, stunned. My mind raced, my heart pounded in my chest. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but I didn't know how to make sense of it all. Everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. I wasn't just the daughter of two ordinary people. I was the daughter of someone far more powerful, someone who had never even acknowledged me. Why didn't he want me? I asked, my voice cracking. With emotion. Why did he let me go? Her gaze softened, and she took my hand in hers, squeezing it gently. I don't know, sweetheart. We tried to reach out to him, but he wouldn't accept the responsibility. He was too busy with his own life. But that doesn't change the fact that you are loved. You always have been. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the revelation about Edward Grace left me with more questions than answers. How could someone so powerful, so influential, just abandon their own child? And if he had known about me all these years, why had he never come forward? Was I really just a forgotten part of his life, or was there something more to this story that I wasn't seeing? I didn't have the answers. But one thing was certain, I needed to find out. I needed to KN out the truth about my real father, about my past, and about the life I had been living for the past 20 years. I have to find him, I said quietly, almost to myself. I need to know why he abandoned me. I need to know what's been kept from me all these years. My mother didn't argue. She just nodded, her face filled with sadness and regret. I understand, Grace. But please, be careful. The Grace family is not a simple family. They are powerful, and they are dangerous. I nodded, though a son. SE of determination filled me. It didn't matter how powerful or dangerous they were. I had a right to know the truth. And I would find it, no matter what it took. As I stood up to leave, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The secrets that had been hidden for so long. The lies that had shaped my life. And the search for the truth which would either break me or set me free. The story of my life, it seemed, was far from over. The air felt heavier every day, as though it had been soaked in a thick fog of confusion and despair. It was an odd kind of numbness that I couldn't shake off, this constant, hollow feeling inside my chest. The kind of feeling that comes when the very foundation of your world is shattered. Nothing felt real anymore. I had been trying to move on, trying to act like everything was fine, but nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. I had learned the truth about my parents, at least, part of it. My entire life had been a carefully constructed lie. The people who had raised me, loved me, and nurtured me weren't even my biological parents. They weren't the ones who had given birth to me, nor had they truly created the bond that I had felt so strongly my entire life. I had always believed that I belonged to them. But how could I belong to people who weren't even my flesh and blood? This question haunted me every waking moment. And then, of course, there was the betrayal. The fiancé who had once promised to love me forever, the man who had given me hope for the future, had turned out to be nothing more than a liar. I had believed in him, and he had ripped that belief apart with nothing more than a cold, indifferent glance. How could someone do that? How could someone pretend to care, to love, to cherish, only to betray you in the cruelest way possible? I sat in my apartment late one evening, staring at the small glass of wine in my hand. The glass trembled slightly, my fingers gripping it a little too hard. My mind replayed the events of the banquet over and over again. The laughter, the smiles, the way he had stood beside me, so confident and so sure. But that certainty had all been a lie. A mask that had fallen away the moment the truth was exposed. I still couldn't understand how it had all happened. One moment, I was living my dream, everything I had hoped for right there in front of me. The next moment, it had all crumbled, leaving nothing but dust in its wake. And now, I had to rebuild from nothing. But how does one rebuild when the very essence of your life has been ripped away? I set the wine glass down with a quiet clink and leaned back against the couch, running my fingers through my hair. The silence in the room felt suffocating, a heavy blanket that refused to lift. I closed my eyes, but all I could see was his face, the face of the man I had loved, the man who had promised me the world. And then there were my parents, the people I had thought of as my own. They were no longer the safe, loving figures I had once trusted. How could they be? How could they possibly be my parents when everything they had told me was a lie? I wanted to scream, to shout at them, but I couldn't find the words. I couldn't find the strength. The truth was that I didn't know what to do anymore. The path ahead seemed so unclear, and the past was nothing but a fog. Every step I took felt uncertain. Like walking on quicksand. And yet, even in the depths of my confusion, there was something else, something I couldn't deny. A sense of responsibility. I had to find out the truth. I had to uncover the hidden parts of my past, the pieces that didn't make sense. My real parents, who were they? Where had they gone? And why had they left me behind? I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just move on and pretend everything was fine. I had to know. And that meant confronting the people who had raised me. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but I knew I had no choice. I couldn't keep living in the dark. The next day, I went to see them. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I had spent the night pacing around my apartment, thinking about it, debating whether or not I should take that step. But in the end, I knew I had to. I needed answers. I needed to understand the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When I arrived at their house, my heart was pounding in my chest. The house, which had on CE felt like a warm, welcoming place, now seemed distant and cold. The walls felt suffocating, and the silence that hung in the air was oppressive. My mother was the first to greet me, as always. She smiled warmly, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation that I couldn't ignore. "Sweetheart, it's so good to see you," she said, her voice gentle. But I could hear the slight quiver in it, as if she was trying to hide something. I smiled weakly, but my heart wasn't in it. I didn't want to pretend anymore. I didn't want to act like everything was okay when it wasn't. The truth was too big to ignore, and it had to come out. "Mom," I began, my voice steady but heavy with emotion, "I need to know the truth." Her face immediately faltered, her smile fading into a look of concern. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This was the moment. There was no turning back now. I need to know about my real parents. Who are they? Why did they leave me? I asked, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. There was a long, painful silence. My mother's face paled, and I could see the struggle in her eyes. She opened her mouth, as though she was about to speak, but then closed it again, her hands trembling at her sides. "I'm not sure if you're ready for this," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. I took a step forward, feeling the weight of the moment. "I need to know. I can't keep living like this." She hesitated for a moment longer, and then finally nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "Your real parents, they are not who you think. They are. We raised you because we loved you, and we wanted to protect you. But your past, your real family, is something that we have kept hidden from you for your own good. I never wanted you to have to know the truth. But now, I see you're not going to rest until you do." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Every instinct inside me screamed to run, to escape this reality, but I couldn't. I had to know. "Tell me," I whispered. "Tell me everything." And then, as she finally began to speak, I realized that my world was about to change again. But this time, the truth wasn't going to break me. It was going to set me free. Days stretched into weeks. It felt like I was living in a world that no longer made sense. I continued to go through the motion of my day-to-day life, but my heart wasn't in it. Every time I woke up, I felt as though I had slipped into someone else's life. The vibrant woman who had once stood tall with confidence, walking hand in hand with the man she believed loved her, was now nothing more than a faint shadow of her former self. And the parents who had once been my everything, who had raised me, loved me, and taught me right from wrong, were now strangers. I could no longer ignore the questions swirling in my mind. Why had my parents kept the truth from me for so long? Why had they lied about my real identity? My entire life was built on a foundation of half-truths, and I was left picking up the shards of a shattered past. It was the middle of the week when I finally made the decision. I had to find out the truth. No more avoiding it, no more pretending I didn't care. The lies had gone on for far too long, and it was time to uncover what had been hidden from me. I spent that morning going through old documents I had found buried in a forgotten box, an assortment of letters, family pictures, and journals from years past. There was one journal in particular that caught my eye, its leather cover worn and frayed. It had belonged to my mother, the woman I had called Mom for as long as I could remember. I opened the journal carefully, my fingers trembling as I traced the delicate pages. Each word felt like a key, unlocking a door to a past I had never known. The first few entries were mundane, about everyday life, her work, her thoughts on family, and her hopes for the future. But then, there it was. A single entry that sent a shiver down my spine. It's getting harder to keep the truth from her. I know she deserves to know, but I don't know how to tell her. How do I tell her that she's not really mine? That her father is a man we've both spent years avoiding? I just hope she never finds out. My heart dropped to my stomach. My D raced, but I couldn't make sense of what I was reading. This was my mother's handwriting, her thoughts spilling out onto the page in a raw and vulnerable way. But who was this man she referred to? And why had they kept the truth from me? I couldn't stop reading. The entries grew darker as I flipped through the pages, filled with guilt and regret. My mother's handwriting became increasingly erratic, as if she were losing control over her own emotions. I felt like I was uncovering a secret that had been buried for far too long. I told him we had to keep her away. That she couldn't know. If she knew the truth, everything would fall apart. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. I can't keep living this lie. I just hope she'll forgive us. I closed the journal abruptly, my head spinning. The words on the page were a knife, cutting through everything I had believed to be true. My parents hadn't just been keeping secrets, they had been living a lie, protecting me from a truth I wasn't ready to face. But why? What had they feared? And why had they never told me the truth before? The truth, the one I had been denied my entire life, was like a shadow that loomed over me, threatening to consume everything. The more I tried to piece together the fragments of my past, the more I realized that I had no real understanding of who I was. Not anymore. I needed answers. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you?" Her voice sounded calm, reassuring, like it always had. But beneath it, I could hear the tremor of uncertainty. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice shaking as I spoke. "I've found the journal, and There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "I think we need to talk. Can you come over? We need to discuss this face to face." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat, slipping it on as I walked toward the door. Every step felt heavier than the last. I was about to confront the woman who had raised me, the woman who had been my mother in every sense of the word, yet had kept the truth from me for so long. What would she say? Would she apologize? Would she tell me everything, or would I be left with more questions? When I arrived at my parents' house, I was greeted with an eerie silence. The house that had once felt like a warm sanctuary now felt cold, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for something to break. I walked inside, my heart pounding in my chest. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her, her face pale. My father was nowhere to be seen. "Sit down, please," my mother said softly, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "We need to talk." I sat down, my hands trembling as I placed them on the table. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" She took a deep breath, her eyes filled with regret. "I didn't know how. I didn't know what to say. I was afraid you wouldn't understand, that you wouldn't forgive us." I stared at her, my mind spinning. "Forgive you for what? What are you hiding from me? Who is my real father?" Her eyes welled up with tears. "Your real father. He's someone from our past. Someone who we've tried to forget. He was never supposed to be part of your life. We thought we could protect you from him, from the truth. But now, I see that it was wrong. You deserve to know who you are. A knot formed in my throat. The man I had been raised to believe was my father was not my biological father after all. The truth had been hidden, buried beneath layers of lies and secrets. And Ow, I had to face it. Who is he? I whispered, my voice barely audible. My mother took another deep breath, her eyes full of sorrow. His name is Edward. Edward Grace. And he's the reason everything happened. Edward Grace? The name echoed in my mind, like a distant memory I couldn't place. Why would you keep him from me? Why did you make me think? She interrupted me, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I never wanted this for you. But now you need to know the truth. Your life, everything you thought you knew, has been shaped by this lie. And now you must decide what to do with it. I sat in stunned silence, my mind racing. My whole world, my whole identity, had been built on a lie. How could I even begin to process this? How could I move forward when everything I had known had just crumbled? I stood up abruptly. I need time, I said, my voice cracking. I need to figure out what this means. What does this mean for me? Who am I now? My mother reached out to me, but I stepped back, not ready for comfort. I needed space, clarity, and the truth. And I would get it, no matter what it took. The weeks after the revelation were filled with both anguish and catharsis, a strange blend of suffering and clarity. Every day I woke up, it was like stepping into a new life. The girl who had once stood at the engagement banquet, dressed in a beautiful red gown and expecting a lifetime of happiness, no longer existed. In her place was someone else, someone who had been shattered by the truth and yet determined to rebuild, to reclaim their own narrative. I couldn't escape the pain of betrayal. Not entirely. It had seeped deep into my bones, into the core of who I was. The memories of that night, the cold detachment in his eyes, the cruel flicker of indifference, would never fade completely. But there was something else there now, too. A burning desire for something more. I wasn't just going to be the victim of this story. I would take control of my future. The discovery that my parents weren't really my biological parents had been devastating. For years, I had believed in the false comfort of their love, the sense of security that came from being their daughter. To learn that my true identity was hidden from me, that everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie, it was like the floor had been pulled out from under me. But now, in the aftermath, something shifted inside me. The darkness that had threatened to swallow me whole began to fade, bit by bit. I had learned the truth about my biological father, Edward, the man I had once heard so much about in passing, his name always wrapped in mystery. The thought that I was connected to him, the head of a powerful family, was both daunting and exhilarating. But what had happened between us, why we had been kept apart, was still shrouded in uncertainty. It was on one quiet afternoon that I finally decided to confront the truth head-on. My adoptive parents, who, in a strange twist of fate, turned out to have been just as much victims as I had been, sat across from me, their faces tired and worn, as though years of unspoken truths had weighed them down just as much as they had burdened me. They had known that one day I would learn the truth. They had known that the carefully constructed world we had lived in for so long would collapse. "Grace," my mother said, her voice trembling as she reached across the table to take my hand. "We never meant to keep this from you. It was just safer this way. We wanted to protect you. Protect me? I whispered, my throat tightening. By lying to me? By letting me live this illusion? Her eyes filled with tears. You don't understand. Your real parents were dangerous people. They were caught up in things that we didn't want you to be part of. We thought it would be better for you to have a different life. One free from their darkness. I could see the anguish on her face. They had done what they thought was best, even though it had destroyed me in the process. It wasn't enough to mend the years of confusion and pain, but there was something about her vulnerability that shifted my perspective. They weren't monsters. They were scared, just as much as I had been. They had acted out of love, albeit misguided. Tell me about them, I said softly, my voice cracking. Tell me about my real parents. Her gaze dropped to the table, her fingers fidgeting with a napkin. She hesitated, her lips trembling. It's a complicated story. One we didn't want you to know. And so, over the next few hours, they told me everything. The story of my biological parents, of Edward and his family, of the web of secrets that had been spun around me from the very beginning. I learned about their connection to the Grace family, how my life had been intertwined with theirs even before I was born. Edward had been a man of power and influence, but with that power came enemies, danger, and betrayal. He had been deceived by those closest to him, leading to the separation of my biological family when I was just a baby. My adoptive parents, seeing the threat, had taken me in, hiding me away from the people who could have hurt me. As the details unfolded, I felt a sense of closure, but not the kind I had expected. It wasn't a neat and tidy resolution, but rather a messy, painful understanding of the choices made for me, both out of love and fear. In the end, it didn't matter who my real parents were. It was the people who had raised me, who had given me their love, that mattered the most. That night, I found myself standing by the window of my room, staring out at the quiet streets below. The city was alive with lights, the hum of life continuing on as it always had. But for me, everything had changed. I had discovered who I truly was, but I had also learned that identity wasn't just about blood or heritage. It was about choice, about the life you built with your own hands and the people you let into your heart. I wasn't just the girl who had been betrayed. I wasn't just the victim of some dark family secret. I was more than that. And so, I made a vow to myself. I would rebuild. I would forge my own path, not dictated by the past, not by the mistakes of others. I would choose my own future. The phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Grace, I know who you are. We need to talk. Your future is still in our hands. A shiver ran down my spine. Was this from Edward? Or someone else? The message was cryptic, filled with meaning and threat, but it was also a promise that my story was far from over. The past could no longer define me. My journey had only just begun.